Hello, we're Team Can't Wait to Graduate, and this will be iteration 2 that we'll be showing. So in this iteration, we focus mainly on the API, filtering the data we get from Skyscanner, and putting it into a class where we can then send it to the front end side. So we worked on filtering the data, and then we also created endpoints to send the data to the front end side. On the UI side, we worked on page routing, and we're also the logging in, and we're also currently working on the flight information. Okay, so first I will show you so on the API side, we created many different models that we can store the information in. So we have the carrier model, currency modules, outbound leg, place module, quote, raw flight. So the raw flight is will have these classes in it all into one, and then from this we'll convert it into the reserve flight, which will we present to the UI side. On the controller, we also added three more endpoints, which now we have we put parameters. So now you have to use these parameters when you call the endpoints. We put post endpoints, where you will post the information that you need. Reserving one, or getting the reserved flights that you've already chosen, and then getting the reserved flights by the user. So first we'll go over the models we created.
The models I created? I think we're already.
Oh, no.
That.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're as you recall, we're using Skyscanner to search for. We're using Skyscanner to search for the cheapest flights available between two places at a certain time. And in order to capture the data that it sends back to us, we created this class called raw flight data, which basically duplicates the format of the JSON that we get. And it contains several, it's composed of several other classes: carriers, currencies, places, and quotes. And those are similar. They just duplicate the JSON sent back. It's nothing that important other than that we use the information once we convert it into this nice clean format that doesn't have a lot of extra stuff and complicated formatting. And we created a converter to convert into that, and this is the format that it's stored in our database.
Okay, now you want to go over your service?
Oh, sure. Let's start from the controller.
Oh.
So yeah, how we would get the data and convert it is we use this this thing called get flights that we created. How do we get that here? Okay. So get flights. Service. So this get flights will take 3 parameters, and the fourth parameter, if you do add it, and what it does is it puts the data that it gets from this service. So what this service does is it reaches out to the API and it returns a block of data, and it populates this raw flight data. Then we use this service that Orion and I have created, which converts it into the appropriate model. Yeah, and then it gets returned to this flight controller. So how do you go to your postman?
Wait, let's talk about
Don't you wanna show the actual converter service?
this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this converter service, alright, you wrote this part.
So, initially Kevin had written it, but then I made some changes to it and it resulted in a change of style as well. But yeah, this service, it reads, it turns a single block of data from Skyscanner into a list of our cleaned up flight objects. One reserved flight object or one flight object for every quote or every price quote offered by Skyscanner for that call. So first, it just sets up the list using a functional style map function, and it creates a one-to-one relationship between the quotes in Skyscanner's data and the items in our list of finished flight data. Then it loads the extra information, the additional information about the place and the date into each one uniformly, because they all go from the same origin to the same destination. It does that again using functional style for each. And once it's done, it just returns this formatted list of the flights.
Okay, so now we'll be showing you the new endpoint in action. So I'm gonna go over here to our postman. So now instead, when we call get flights, oh wait, let me start by. Oh yeah. Sorry, we had a previous date here.
Set it to like way in advance.
Okay, we'll do something like this. Okay, so now we're no longer retrieving the Skyscanner response. We're retrieving our filtered response. And the next thing we did is we worked on connecting the API to the database. So our database that we're using Mongo. So we have created the DAO information. So here we have list reserved flights. And then in our application properties, we are calling the URI from Mongo, the user that we're using. We have the password right there. So now here, so we have three new endpoints. We have the post. I'll go over that. So here you're able to add basically if you want to reserve a flight, we'll have something like this. It'll have a username, an ID, and then we'll send it off. So now when we retrieve, now we can, with our other endpoint, we can retrieve the other ones. So as you can see, we have, in the MongoDB, we will have the the reserve flight that we chose. And here we can also show you, oh, 1 sec. Okay, alright, so I'll show you that it's working. I'll create a different username. And then we will get the reserve flights. So here we have mine, and then we have Yoon's. And then the last one we created is you can get the reserve flights by usernames. So I'll type in Yoon, and then we have here would be the user that's Yoon, and then type in me. We'll have the other one. So now we'll talk about the test coverage. So we're gonna run our application with coverage.
We have lots more tests now. Should I talk about this part? Okay, so yeah, we have lots more tests now. In the beginning, we had tests for just the DAO, but now we have tests for the Skyscanner service. Oh, yeah. And, the coverage was 100% a while ago, but, after some changes, there are some things in the controllers that don't have 100% yet, namely our new post and get mappings, in the controller, but that's very basic. We're going to add tests for those, but they really, it does nothing but call something else that's in the DAO, so, but it wasn't our priority as soon as we added it, but we are going to add the tests. But the tests we do have include, everything else though has 100% coverage. Our services all have 100% coverage, including the Skyscanner service and the converter and the flight service that handles all of those, that handles both of these two. Can I minimize this? Yeah. Okay, so an example of our tests that we have are, we have this one that just tests whether the Skyscanner is returning the correct format. In case if they change anything, we'll change it, but it tries to convert it to our format class, and it checks if it doesn't throw a JSON exception. If it had been in the wrong format, it would have thrown a JSON exception. And then it checks whether it has data to work with and whether the data is in the format that our converter depends on. And we have a lot of tests for the converter, where it just tests the individual phases of the conversion process. It tests whether the data lands in the correct format, from a given example raw flight data for the quotes, the places, and the dates. And it also tests whether an empty raw flight data results in an empty list, or where a raw flight data with only one of the types of quotes that there can be, like indirect or direct flight quotes, results in a list with only one, and then finally one that has both types of quotes results in a list with two finished flight data. Then our service tests involve testing whether it can generate the parameter string from our input parameters in the code to send to Skyscanner, and then whether we use a mock in this case to test whether our service get flights function is connected directly to the Skyscanner function. And we use a mock just to avoid actually having to call Skyscanner just to test for that purpose. And, we've already shown the flight DAO tests, and after looking into this, we confirm that it isn't just testing the mock, it does actually test our DAO, but it looks kind of generic, but that's just because we're using a framework that generates a lot of code for us, but it does test whether everything is connected and configured correctly, and it seems to be in our case. And then finally, just the controller tests, another thing with a mock where it tests whether the controller properly calls the service and whether it returns the format we're expecting with the converted format now rather than anything else. So that's our tests that we have so far. We're going to be adding more and more for every feature that we add to the API, and that's as far as we have for tests so far.
Okay, now we'll go over the UI part. So, you wanna come over here? Copy right here. Copy this one. Okay. Sorry, running now.
Cool, so this is the general layout for the UI. I'm pretty sure last iteration Nemo showed the prototyping that we did. So this will be the homepage, and here is where you can choose the departuring city, which right now, since we're still waiting on the data from the backend, there's nothing available to select. As well as the arrival city, you can select the number of passengers, which does nothing really, it's just a kind of nice touch to add. In addition, you can choose the starting and ending date, which should work. It's funny. You said it is. Sure, that's not choosing that. I can pull it up on my laptop after. But additionally, you can choose if it's a one-way or if it's a round trip, and then finally you'll have a button to go ahead and run through the database, call the API, and pull up all the available listings for the specified conditions. In addition to this, we also have the planner tab, and this is where, right now it's just test data, but like Nemo said, whenever we will pull in from the username or from specified conditions, it'll pull up the specific flight data based on the formatting that we've selected. There's also two tabs here. One is for a sign out button, so once we have users authenticated and signed in, they'll be able to sign out. And then the last one is just to go to their profile. So then everything routing wise from the front end is pretty much done. The last thing we would have is this card feature, card component, and I'll let Nicole talk about that.
Yeah, so this is basically like the main interface, or the main thing you're gonna be seeing when you search and save your flights. We made a card. It has tabs for departure and arrival using React, and yeah, it just shows you basic information, your airliner, your airports, your times, and the costs. And right now this is just like the mock-up, and we still have to link this up with the backend.
Okay, now we'll talk about the backlog, what we've accomplished, and what our next steps are. So, let me move out a little bit. Okay, so far we've completed a lot of the main calls that we're gonna need in the API side, like reserving a flight, getting the flights, and getting reserved flights by username. What we'll be working on in the next iteration will be, we're gonna focus a lot more on the UI, like building out the components for this. We decided instead of going for a table, we're gonna create it as a component because it'll depend on whether it's a one-way flight or a return flight. So yeah, we're gonna focus mainly on improving this, and we will also, be calling the endpoints from we'll be connecting the UI and the API, and we'll be populating these tables or components. Yep, so the next thing, we're also, we have begun working on the login verification. That's another thing we're working on. And we have completed, and for the API side, we will be working on, filtering the data by, like price or, stuff like that. So in the next, this coming up iteration, we'll be working on data cards, login registration, endpoint connections, and populating the data cards with the data we retrieved from the API. That's about it. Any questions?
So I have one thing that's like kind of in the works. Can I still showcase that, or does it just need to be? I can go ahead and plug it in. So what I have here is the login, sign up, registration, and user authentication part. So I can go ahead and start this. And basically, with the permission of our sponsor, they allowed us to use AWS and Cognito, which is Amazon's user authentication registration service. So as of right now, you can see that it has this username, this email here. I'm gonna quickly sign out. So what it allows you to do is register and log in. I'm going to just create a new account. Actually, what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll try to sign in with user credentials that don't exist, so you can see what happens. And it should tell me, yeah, incorrect username or password. So this is the default that AWS gives back, but we need to change it on our end to say that the user doesn't exist, or if the user does exist, then the password is incorrect. So if I go ahead and create an account right now, it says username, but it by default takes in an email. So that's something we also have to change. There are password limitations. So for example, you can't just have all lowercase, you can't just have all numbers. It has to have one uppercase, one lowercase, and then one special character. And then right now, phone number doesn't really matter, so I think. So it's gonna let me create an account. Cool, so now, additionally what it does is it will send you a confirmation code. So now if I go to my email, I get a confirmation code. I can go ahead and put that in. I can confirm it, and that should work. So if I try to sign in with the account that I just made, it should let me into the app. And there you go. So now it changed from that 10-minute email that I previously had to my email. And you can still access all the components. And I think this might work now. But yeah, so essentially what that means is now that it has access to this username, so like Nemo was saying, it'll have the user ID. As soon as you click on Planner, it'll parse that ID, go into the back end, into the database, and try to find all the associated flights for one-way or a round trip, and it'll populate this card format with everything that's associated.